Okay, welcome to Chapter 1, Section 2, The Dawn of History. Most anthropologists have found evidence that the first human beings came from Africa. As your book describes, the Leakeys discovered an early hominid or human-like primate. They called this hominid Lucy. It's an Australopithecine, is its scientific name. They found it in Ethiopia, in East Africa. They believe that all humankind originated there because that is the oldest fossil remains that we have come from Africa. Well, let's look at what we're going to find out, or what are some of the important things that you're going to learn from this section. Well, what advances did people make during the Old Stone Age? And the Old Stone Age is actually what anthropologists, archaeologists, historians call the period between about 2 million BC to about 10,000 BC. Remember, when we're talking about BC, before Christ, or sometimes you'll see BCE, before the Common Era. Don't get the two, I mean, they're the same thing, so there should be no mix-up there. We call that the Old Stone Age, or the Paleolithic Age, because Paleolithic means old stone. And remember, it goes backwards, so you start at about 2 million BC before Christ, 2 million years before Christ, and that goes right up to about 10,000 years before Christ. So that's a really long period, this Old Stone Age. Well, what are some of the advancements that people made during that time period? It's a long time. And how can we learn about the religious beliefs of early people? So we're going to look at this topic a lot this year. It's an important part of history. Religious beliefs of early people, religious beliefs of all people. We see that has an important influence on what goes on in the world even today. Why was the Neolithic agricultural revolution a turning point in history? So Neolithic was the time period after the Paleolithic. Neo means new, lithic means stone, new Stone Age. All right, so that period from 10,000 BC moving forward is known as the Neolithic Age. So we have Old Stone Age or Paleolithic Age, and we have New Stone Age, Neolithic Age. And we have what's known as an agricultural revolution. Hopefully all of you know that agricultural has to do with farming. I'm not so sure all of you know what revolution is, but you've probably heard this word before in terms of the American Revolution and maybe even the French Revolution through your traverses through history. Okay. During the Old Stone Age, people lived as nomads. And a nomad is someone who does not settle down in one place for a very long time. They don't build communities or civilizations. They travel from place to place throughout the year. They follow herds of animals, hunting them, gathering food, nuts, berries, plants, things of that nature. No pun intended with nature. They made simple tools and weapons out of stone, bone, or wood, hence the term Stone Age. They're making tools and various things out of stone. They're going to use these tools to help them survive through difficult, rough conditions. We also know that nomads could not sustain a huge society, so they tended to be very small in nature, maybe 20, 30 people in a group. Close-knit family. They moved around from place to place following the animals. They developed a spoken language, so not written yet, no written language, but they could communicate primitively between one another and explain to each other what they wanted done. Probably a lot of ugs and ugs and ogs and eeks. All right, a lot of that kind of stuff. They were completely 100% dependent on nature, on the environment for their survival. They did find some ways, like as you see in the previous post, to adapt to their surroundings. Maybe they lived and lived out of them. They eventually developed fire. They used these stone tools to help them adapt. At some point, they did learn to speak and communicate, and probably to help them with hunts and things like that. They invented clothing to stay warm, obviously animal skins. Again, there are your caves and overhangs for shelter, hence the term which we sometimes use to describe these people living at the time, cavemen. and there's their fires. So fire is a huge invention for the time. I'm sure, almost positive it came about through accident, but this is what is going to move them into the next stage of advancement. This making tools and fire and spoken language, eventually all this is going to lead them into the new Stone Age. Okay, early people left evidence of their belief in a spiritual world. What does that mean, a spiritual world? This is going to have to do with religion. This means life after death, that something happens to you when you die. So your soul, your spirit lives on afterwards. And how do we know that they believe this? How do we know that 30,000 years ago there was some evidence that there was a spiritual world and the forces were acting upon them? Well, let's look at some of these things. Some stone statues. Scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists believe that these stone statues might have some religious meaning. Some statues of pregnant women suggest that they may have worshipped a mother goddess, a mother earth goddess, where life springs forth from the mother, just like life springs forth to an earthly mother, a human mother. Animism, we're going to see this term over and over again, and that is the idea that, or belief that, the world is full of all of these spirits and forces. Again, they couldn't explain why there was lightning, why there was fire, why the wind blew, why it rained for so long at certain times, and why it got cold. And so they came up with this idea that the spirits in nature were causing all of these things. And these spirits resided in the different things in nature, like trees or birds, or even in your dreams they could come and connect with you. We see on cave walls, we see rudimentary paintings of animals, and we believe that that is part of their religion. And finally, people were, at this point, beginning to bury their dead with care. They would bury them with tools, they would bury them with weapons, they would bury them with things to survive in the afterlife, and this suggests that they believed that somehow the soul or the spirit or this person would live after they died. So there was some sort of a spiritual world. And these customs are going to survive right up until today. We still have religious rituals with funerals and ceremonies of that nature that still go on today. So that's your Paleolithic time, and now we're going to be moving forward. And around 10,000 BC, 11 or 12,000 years ago, something changes. Something changes dramatically. And what happens is people stop traveling around, not instantaneously, but slowly people begin to settle down, to farm, to live in one place for a longer time, and eventually build communities there, which are going to spread and grow and turn into civilizations. And this word civilization is going to be important in this chapter as well, and the next couple of chapters. So here's the difference. And a revolution is a great change, a rapid change, but a major change, a huge difference. So there's a life before and a life after the revolution. Well, what was life like before? We had said this. They relied on hunting and gathering. They moved around. They were nomads. They lived in very small hunting groups. They didn't get very large. And they waited for migrating animals to return each year, or sometimes they followed them. They went to where the fruit was ripe. For the most part, they were not settling down. After this change, people learned to farm and were able to produce their own food. They settled into permanent villages, and they learned to domesticate or tame animals. So they didn't have to follow the herds around anymore. They just went out back and got an animal from out back. They bred animals for food and for clothing. They could share the sheep. So now they were right there. They didn't have to move around as much. And this probably all happens by accident. We're not really sure exactly what. We do know that the Earth started to heat up. There was global warming occurring about 11 or 12,000 years ago. The Earth's temperature began to rise. When this happens, the climate begins to get better for growing things. You could stay in one place longer, and maybe as they stayed in one place and they ate food and they left it on the ground and the seeds went into the soil and began to grow, they started to put two and two together and see that it was the seeds that led to growing of the food, and over time they just stayed in one place and grew this food. And now this is a huge change. Think of the things that could happen now. Now that you're growing your own food, now that you have your own animals domesticated, now that you can use those animals, plow your fields, to, just like I said, just a source of food, that you have a constant source of food. How does this change things? Well, obviously, people are going to live longer. They're going to stay in one place. They're going to have, children and grandchildren. I mean, these people probably never met a grandchild in their life. They were probably dying when they were 25, 30, maybe 40 years old. That would be the old people. Right? So they may never have even known their grandchild. These people definitely did. So big difference. People were living longer. There were more of them. They settled down in permanent villages, grew their own crops, domesticated, tamed animals. They probably are going to start to get a written language. All these things come about because of this Neolithic / agricultural revolution. New Stone Age as opposed to the old Stone Age. Some of the new technologies that they got, obviously they had to protect their crops. They had to measure out enough seed each year. So they needed to measure properly. They started having calendars to know when to plant and when to harvest. They learned how to use beasts of burden to help plow their fields, as I mentioned before. They started to have specialized jobs, so each person had a job in the village that they did. You might have some people making tools, some people planting crops, some people doing other things with the food, making them into certain things, building houses, building statues. They're going to start having religions now. So maybe they weren't churches yet, but they could have been holy temples, building roads. So you have architects and designers and builders and all sorts of different job specializations. And by 5,000 years ago, we're going to really start to see the first civilizations emerge in Egypt and Mesopotamia and along the Indus River Valley and in China. We're going to see all these civilizations begin to emerge. So let's wrap up Chapter 1, Section 2. Which of the following suggests that early peoples held religious beliefs? Is it A, they buried their dead with tools, weapons, and other items needed in the afterlife? They learned to produce their own food, developed a spoken language, or they lived in caves under rocky overhangs? Well, all these things are true. Right? They did do all of these things. But which one shows that they had religious beliefs? And that would be that they buried their dead because they believed in some sort of a life after death, the afterlife. And which was an advance of the Neolithic agricultural revolution? Remember, big change. People began to gather nuts and berries. They learned how to hunt. They learned how to produce their own food, or they became nomads. Now, 3 of these became nomads, learning how to hunt and gathering. That was all part of the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age. The one that was part of the New Stone Age, obviously, was the ability to produce their own food. Agriculture is producing your own food, growing your own food. So there you go. That wraps up Section 2, and it also wraps up this section of the videos.